Relations. We're going to call everybody together now and find your seats. We're going to get ready to start this morning. So I know that Stacy has some breakfast here and there's coffee here. So please, by all means, gather what you need and find your seats. But I'm doing the opening today. I'm going to start here in Omaha, EA, in the Omaha language. So again, I say, Ewide Wongide, all my relations. Good morning to each one of you. Ebeblite wiblatamike, Umaha ijaje wiwitate shonge chube wa'u. Wache ijaje wiwitate Renee Sans Souci. Inoha wiwitake ala Sans Souci. Moshi hondi. Ivinge. Idadi wiwitake. Frank Sans Souci. Shonge hizi. Ivinge. Umaha wa'ubli. So in Omaha, I said, all my relations. Let me introduce myself. My Omaha name is Sacred Horsewoman. My English name, or white man name as it's translated, is Renee Sans Souci. My mother was Alice Sans Souci, Moshi Hondi. And that word translates to eagle that circles high in the sky. And meaning that she could see everything below her, right? And if you knew my mother, then you could say that she was very much like an eagle. And when we talk about our loved ones who are deceased, we say Ivinge after their names, meaning they are no longer here. They're in the spirit world. My father was Frank Sans Souci, Shonge Hizi, which means yellow horse. And he too is in the spirit world. And lastly, what I said was, I'm an Umonhon woman. Last night I did the self-introduction and I just gave part of an explanation as to the meaning of that. And a lot of that has to do with relationship. So with the Omaha people who are here, they could then understand if they, heard my introduction, they can then determine how they're related to me as an Omaha woman, as an Omaha relative, because they might know something about my family or my parents. And if they're a different tribe, then again, they may be looking and saying, how are we related to that tribe, to the Omaha tribe? And then they can determine that. And even say, well, isn't somebody, in our family married into that tribe, as an example? And then they might say, okay, so then we're related to her this way. So again, what it does is it places me, and it also helps people to determine their relationship to me. But for non-native people, you may not be familiar at all, with this whole idea of how we're related. However, what it also does, when I say it places me, if you know anything about the Omaha tribe, then you will know where we are. We're in the traditional homelands of the Umonhon Nation, here in the city of Omaha, which is named after the Omaha people, right? So I wanted to give you that. So, and again, what I'll say is, Vatite Udon, it's good you're here. Welcome to Omaha country. And being in the traditional homelands of the Umonhon Nation, also called the Omaha tribe of Nebraska, I thank you for coming this morning. I would also like to acknowledge our planning committee, the Indigenous Peoples Summit Planning Committee. They are Luis Marcos. I don't know if Luis is here. Stacy Larvey, and she is our breakfast chef this morning. She's a member of the Ponca tribe of Nebraska. Brandon Cobb, he's here with the Chalagi Nation, Cherokee Nation. Sheila Barefoot, I know she's here too. Oh, there she is. And she is Chiricahua, Apache. And Dr. Rudy Mitchell, and I know he was here last night. Uncle Rudy is also Omaha. Dr. Christina Kinsinger. Oh, there she is in the back. Martha Lydia Oxy Chuy Lissandra Lorenzo. And I know she's also here somewhere. She's probably on her way. So this is our planning committee for this year, and I'm serving as the chairperson. We are grateful for this opportunity this year to host the 2023 Indigenous Peoples Summit in collaboration with the Mayan Comunidad. If you are familiar with some of the history, then you know that the Mayan Comunidad began the Indigenous Peoples Summit years back. I was at one of the earlier ones on a panel in 2013, in fact. We wish to thank our sponsors for helping to make this happen, and I will briefly read that. Let's see. The original Oatly, ACLU of Nebraska, the Nature Conservancy, UNMC Water, Climate, and Health Program, the Natalie Simmons Foundation, and the Ho-Chunk Incorporated company from the Ho-Chunk Nation here. Thank you for helping to make this all happen. And again, to everyone, welcome. Weeblaha. With that, I'm going to start in with our prayer. I wanted to share these words, though, from one of my ancestors. And this is taken from David Wishart's book, The Dispossession of the Nebraska Indians. And this, at the beginning of this book, when I first read this, it touched me so deeply that, those words stay with me. So this is how it goes. Now the face of all the land is changed and sad. The living creatures are gone. I see the land desolate, and I suffer unspeakable sadness. Sometimes I wake in the night and feel as though I should suffocate from the pressure of this awful feeling of loneliness. And this was Whitehorse, Shungeska of the Omaha tribe. He is one of my ancestors in my lineage. August 13th, 1912. And his words are exactly about what happened to the land after colonization. All the animals, all the plants, the whole land was terraformed, right before our eyes. And of course, we were dispossessed of our lands, of our territories, and then placed on the reservations. Imagine that kind of loneliness of not having the connection to the land, which makes everything possible. So with that, I wanted you to think about that throughout this day. And we're going to have a really good day, I know that. So I'll begin the prayer and then we'll commence. But thank you again so much. Weeblaha. In front of me, I have one of the most sacred medicines that we could ever have in this world, and that is water. And then I've also lit some of the sage. Wakonda Weeblaha. wakonda wadaho. Wakonda shingajingama wachubeaka. Ni wachubeaka. Wiblaha. Idado gruba udashkache. Wiblaha. Creator, thank you. Our children are sacred. Our water is sacred. Thank you. In this prayer, we give thanks for everything. For everything that you do is good. Wakanda, bring a blessing here at the beginning of our summit. Help all of us with this understanding of how to be in good relationship with Mother Earth. Thank you for everything that has made this all possible to bring Indigenous peoples together, and also with our non-Native relatives who are here in allyship. Thank you. And I thank you again for all the blessings. Blessings for my family, blessings for this life. And I say, we blanha. Thank you so much. Ewide, wongide, all my relations. With that, I'll say thank you again, and let's be seated, and we'll begin our day. And as you're gathering your food, your breakfast, and having coffee and water, take that time, this is your time right now to have a good visit with one another. Introduce yourself to people who you don't know, and, take this time. I really feel fortunate again that we're able to be in this place and time together. Parents, they all went through something here on Turtle Island. And for my mother, Renee Sans Souci, she grew up in a time of transition. If you know anything about Omaha history, then you're aware of the Dawes Allotment Act after we were placed on the reservations, right? Then to add insult to injury, the Dawes Allotment Act was enacted to, again, to talk about it kind of makes my chest hurt. But it separated the land again into partial, family, I guess they call it severalty, but family partitions. And this was disastrous, of course, for tribal people. So my mom grew up in a time after the Dawes Allotment Act was enacted upon the Omaha tribe of Nebraska. And so she grew up, she was born in 1937, and she grew up in a time when her grandparents had a homestead. So I'll read this. My name is Alice Fern Fremont Sans Souci. Umaha ijaje wiwita te moshihoni. I was born November 25th, 1937. I lived between Macy and Decatur. I was raised by my grandparents, Emma Parker Kemp and John Horst Kemp. I was not raised by my parents. As a child, I lived out there in a rural area, as we call it today. My grandparents were farmers. We had chickens and hogs, no cows, and our duties were to help take care of the animals. I remember that we had a dog and a cat. And then what I remember, my grandmother did not speak English. She was very traditional. John, he attended Carlisle Indian School. That's where he went to school, and he knew English. And he translated a lot for my grandmother. We did not go to school early on. She was very suspicious, or she didn't really trust the white people. There were times that this lady came to our place where I was raised, and when this white lady would show up, my grandmother would say, "Go inside. This bad white woman has come." And so we went inside, and she would call for my grandfather and tell him, "Go over there and speak to her." and she directed my grandfather to do this. He would talk to this lady out on the road. And when he came back, we said, what did she want? What did that white woman want? I must have been school age then, about 5. And I'd ask him, Wachiwa'u idado gona, idado goda. What did that white woman want? And he would say, well, she is the superintendent of the county. I had no idea what the superintendent did in those days, but she was the one that always came. She never did come into the house or yard. The conversation was out on the road, so he spoke to her out on the road. And it was always the same, wondering why we weren't in school. So, her experiences were partly documented here in this book called Women Elders' Life Stories of the Omaha Tribe. And it was a thesis, I believe, of Win L. Summers. And when my mother was alive, as well as Hawate, whose story is also in here, and as well as my Aunt Eleanor, who is alive, oftentimes I'd accompany them when they went on their trips, when they were presenting their stories. So I happened to be there. So part of it was having that experience and understanding why their stories were so important. So this other part here is my grandmother did her grocery shopping in Decatur and Lyons. When we went to Lyons, she spoke of the proprietor as Siteri Basu. They spoke in Omaha, carried on this conversation. Now understand that this shopkeeper, this store manager, store owner, he spoke the Omaha language, and he was a non-native back in the days. So they carried on this conversation. He tells her what's going on in Lyons. She tells him what's going on here on our reservation. And they carried this on, and she ordered everything in our language, and he got it. He gave them to her. Today, it's not so. You don't see that. He was white, but he knew the Omaha language. Back in those days, they had to. That was their survival because they had to speak our language if they owned stores and other businesses. Sive Basu is talking about the heel, the heel on his foot. He wore an orthopedic shoe. Part of one shoe was higher than the other. That's where she did her grocery shopping and clothing too. You could go in one place and just buy everything back in those days. Walmart. So, but we had our own, in her home, we had our own apple orchard. We had our chokecherry bush. We had our strawberry patch. And the farmers going toward between Lyons and Decatur, they had orchards, pears, peaches. But the other 2 trees belong to the Parkers that she's talking, describing all of these garden spaces, right? We picked them, took them home, and canned them. My grandmother did a lot of canning, and we butchered. We never went to the grocery store to buy meat. She would tell my grandfather, Deska tanuka blate kombra. I'm hungry for beef. He'd go and bring that beef home. They would say their prayers and everything, have their rituals, then they would shoot the animal. We laid it down and went in, and they would shoot it. And it's all fine. So imagine that, because this is what we did with our buffalo, right? But of course, what happened with the buffalo. They were hauling it in, and here we are, kids. We did the pumping of the water because there was constant water coming. They washed it, everything, and rinsed the meat. Once they did that, they put salt on it. Cooking salt, tanning salt, I'm not sure, but we didn't have a smokehouse. They used salt, and we had a porch that had a roof. They had small logs that were crossed, and the meat was there. We had this window, and we'd open that up and fall out there, and go get what meat we wanted and take it down. That was what we did. She also fried the meat, roasted it, and she canned it. Canned that fried meat, pork chops, whatever. She canned it, and it never spoiled. So it gives you an idea what that was like. She would describe a lot of things to me and to my siblings, to our family, about how she, witnessed her grandmother taking care of their garden, which was, a combination, traditional indigenous foods, as well as something, I guess, that was contemporized by the non-natives. And then during that time again, this was probably right after the Great Depression, right, right around World War II, when everybody else was having difficulties. She and her grandparents had it, they were like considered wealthy back in those days because they had everything they needed, right? All the food, their meats and so forth. And they dried their food, traditionally. And my mom said, I used to have the duty of watching the meat as it was drying. And she goes, I wanted to play, but I had to, drive all the flies away. And she talked about, drying like our squash. And, doing all of these things that made it possible so that they could survive, in a time when, like I said, after the Great Depression, if you can imagine what that was like. And most people were having a lot of difficulty. So, when my mother told her stories to us, of course, as our elders would tell stories to us over and over and over. And I didn't understand, why is she telling that same story again? I heard it before. But now I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. She ground those stories into us thoroughly. So before she passed, we were working on her biography. And of course, that was interrupted. But I'm glad that, with my brothers, my sisters, that we're able to sit down at some point and put everything together that she shared with us so we can complete that biography about her life. And it's important that when we have such documentation, that we're able to share it. And I give that thanks to everyone, again, for listening. And with that, I want to begin this next part. If you are noticing, there are some altars up here. There's an altar over here on that table. There's one right here next to the stage, and then I have a little altar here as well. And each one of them have really powerful meanings. And with everything that happens, for us, for Native people, everything is ceremony. Every single day, the fact that we're alive, the fact that we're breathing is ceremony. And, it's so important that we're able to acknowledge, our everyday lives in such a way. To take that time to acknowledge our own breath and our own lives, and then to understand that we can acknowledge everyone else as well. Because we're all human beings. So,